It was he, in his last stint as Attorney General under George Bush Sr., who announced the charges against the first two men in connection with the Lockerbie case, including Abdulbasit al-Megrahi, who was ultimately convicted but later granted compassionate release by Scottish officials because he had cancer. It was the worst terrorist attack in British history, 11 people on the ground and all 259 people on board being killed. 189 of them were American citizens, including dozens of students returning home. The investigation into all their deaths still goes on.
Jerry has some other stories from our news desk.
Residents of a village in Lebanon are demanding a full investigation after unidentified gunmen shot dead a photographer as he was preparing to take his children to school. The killing in the mountain village of Kahale was caught on video. The manner of the killing has raised fears it may have been a professional hit. Local media have identified the victim as a photographer for the security services. Danish politicians have voted to approve a ban on mink breeding until 2022, retroactively creating the legal basis for the government's order to cull all mink. The authorities in Denmark were worried that a mutated form of coronavirus found in mink might impair the efficacy of vaccines. And the US singer Ariana Grande has revealed she's engaged to her boyfriend, Dalton Gomez, who's a real estate agent. She posted several photos on her Instagram page showing a pearl and diamond ring on her left hand. It bore the caption, "Forever and then some." The star, who's 27, has been dating Dalton Gomez for just under a year.
We heard earlier in the programme about a new form of SARS-CoV-2 spreading in the UK. Another has been detected in South Africa, and they seem to have one crucial thing in common: the ability to pass from person to person far more easily. They have one mutation in common, and both involve changes to the spike protein, which the virus uses to bind to our cells. Professor Tulio de Oliveira from the University of KwaZulu-Natal is the leader of the team that discovered the new variant that's now become dominant in South Africa. He says that in early December, he alerted the World Health Organization to the unusual number of mutations in the spike protein and the speed at which they're developing.
It is very unusual, and it is very unusual how these two lineages, and just to make crystal clear, they are different lineages in South Africa and the UK. They only share one mutation between them, that's this 501Y mutation, yeah? So it's quite unusual that they appear and they start dominating so quickly. Here in South Africa, especially in the provinces that are experiencing a very fast increase in the second wave, we basically only find this lineage in South Africa.
And that's interesting. So it's doing the same thing in South Africa and the same thing in the UK, but they're actually not connected. It's the virus coming up with a mutation that enables it to do this.
Yes, it's not only a mutation. Yes, so just to explain, so the UK lineage has what we call 14 defining mutations. This is different mutations at different parts of the virus, which in the case of the UK, 6 of them concentrate in the spike gene. The South African lineage, which we decided to call 501V2, because the second major variant spreading, it has 15 lineage defining mutations, with 8 of them it's concentrated in the spike gene. And between these two lineages, we only share one mutation.
Professor Tulio de Oliveira speaking to Lawrence Pollard. Now,
the man from Stevenage comes across the line, wins the Turkish Grand Prix and becomes the most successful Formula One driver of all time. Equals Michael Schumacher's World Championship record with 7.
Lewis Hamilton has been chosen by the public as the 2020 BBC Sports Personality of the Year, adding to his first win in 2014. His standing amongst the greats of Formula One, his growing stature as a spokesman for diversity, and of course his record equalling 7th Formula One World Drivers' Championship all contributed to his success. During the awards show, Lewis Hamilton was asked how he got to where he is now.
I've been racing for 27 years. It's taken a long time, and I think it was such a far-fetched dream for us as a family, and there were so many sacrifices from my family, and along the way so many trials and tribulations, obviously. And I think just those last few laps and then building up to that world title, you know, that dream was becoming a reality. And I thought about all my family gave to get me there. And it just brought up a lot of emotion that I wasn't expecting it naturally, but I'm grateful it happened.
The 7 world titles is phenomenal, but also you're now the most successful Formula One driver ever with 95 race wins, 98 pole positions. With everything you've achieved, how do you keep pushing yourself year after year?
Well, firstly, I couldn't have done that without a great group of people behind me who I'm so grateful for all their hard work. And I think it's a collaboration. I love each year we have to raise the bar. I love that as a driver, physically and mentally, that's what I'm challenged with, but also working with a group of people, having to raise the bar collectively. And, you know, I think it's just a part of my DNA. I love what I do, and I've been passionate about it since I was 5 years old. So each year I come back, and I'm already back into training since I fell ill, and I'm already focused on being better next year, but it's easier said than done.
Lewis, you've used your platform in such an incredible way this year. You are still the only black driver in Formula One. How is this going to change?
Well, I mean, it's never been a diverse sport, and I think this year you've seen so many inspirational individuals, and it's, you know, congratulations to Marcus there. I think there's so many people doing great things out there. I think our sport, it shouldn't be a matter from where you come from. You know, we've really got to fight for gender equality. It shouldn't matter where your socioeconomic background is, and or, you know, your religion. And so I think we've got to work together collectively. And that's really why I put the Hamilton Commission together, to try and find out really what the barriers are, break those down. It does go down to education, but really try to help encourage and as I said, move those barriers for young black kids getting into STEM subjects so they can get into engineering. There are so many jobs, great jobs within this industry. And it's not about seeing the next me come through particularly. It's really about creating opportunities, equal opportunities for and reflective of the outside world.
Lewis Hamilton, and he mentioned Marcus. That, of course, was the England and Manchester United forward Marcus Rashford, who was also honoured a special award for his work to raise awareness of child food poverty in the UK. Thanks for listening to the Newsroom.
You may have heard of Rudolph, but why are reindeer such unique animals? That's coming next. And then in half an hour, it's News Hour with Julian Marshall.
Countries around the world have begun banning flights and goods from the United Kingdom after the emergence in the UK of a highly infectious variant of the coronavirus.
Then the guest on Hard Talk is the venture capitalist and entrepreneur Herman Hauser.
So 50 billion ought to be spent to get our independence from Chinese monopolies, and the other 50 billion we ought to spend to get out from under American monopolies.
And online, you can hear our series looking at climate change.
For 195 governments to come to that conclusion and to that agreement with each other, it requires extraordinary mindset shifts.
You can hear more at bbcworldservice.com.
On The Conversation, we're exploring the lives of women who follow reindeer. A traditional reindeer herder from the indigenous Sami community will discuss life on the road following her migrating herd. And a biologist who moves between Finland and Alaska tells us what makes a reindeer such a unique animal. What do reindeers smell like? Do they have personalities? And how is climate change affecting their way of life? After the news with me, Kim Chakaneta.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. France has indicated it may lift a 48-hour ban on lorries crossing the Channel from England if EU countries can agree rules on movement from Britain. The French Transport Minister said EU members meeting in Brussels were trying to draw up a solid health protocol. Many countries have suspended flights or put in other travel restrictions amid fears about the spread from Britain of a more contagious variant of coronavirus. The European Medicines Agency is expected to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine a week earlier than planned. Germany has wanted to use a vaccine its scientists developed. The Danish Parliament has approved a ban on mink breeding until 2022, retroactively creating the legal basis for the government's order to cull all mink. Officials were worried that a mutated form of coronavirus found in mink might impair vaccine efficacy. A court in Germany has sentenced a far-right extremist, Stefan Balliet, to life in jail for killing 2 people in a thwarted attack on a synagogue in the city of Halle last year. The investigative group Bellingcat has revealed that the Russian opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, has had a long conversation by phone with an FSB agent sent to clear up the poisoning operation in Siberia, which left him fighting for his life. Bellingcat says Mr. Navalny impersonated a senior security official, and the call was set up to indicate it was coming from an FSB landline. The EU Foreign Policy Chief has urged the authorities in Bosnia to open alternative facilities to house more than 3,000 migrants who face eviction from a reception centre in northwestern Bosnia. Josep Borrell called the situation alarming. And EU antitrust regulators have approved the merger of the car manufacturing giants Fiat Chrysler with PSA. BBC News.
How he felt about the timing.
Frustrated, I suppose. Yes, I wrote to them when the Crown Office in Scotland sent me the invitation. I said that I wish we consider the timing, particularly the choice of this specific day, disrespectful, insensitive and extremely ill-considered. Why weren't the Attorney General's about to leave office as he waited 32 years to bring charges, which he've known about for all that time?
Alim Makboul reports from Washington.
The new charges are thought to relate to a Libyan man named Abu Aghela Massoud, who's suspected of being the maker of the bomb that detonated on board Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie exactly 32 years ago today. The outgoing US Attorney General is due to give details at a news conference later, including whether the suspect's whereabouts are known at all. It's a case that William Barr's had a connection to for decades. It was he, in his last stint as Attorney General under George Bush Sr., who announced the charges against the first 2 men in connection with the Lockerbie case, including Abdulbasit al-Megrahi, who was ultimately convicted but later granted compassionate release by Scottish officials because he had cancer. It was the worst terrorist attack in British history, 11 people on the ground and all 259 people on board being killed.
In terms of the sound, because obviously you move with your
citizens,
herd, what does it sound like when they're moving together?
Including dozens of students.
It's a quite magical sound. You can hear the reindeers are walking and there's something clicking in their feet.
It's a tendon that is snapping against the cannon bone that's in like the
investigation
ankle.
into all their
If you
death.
can think of kind of like a rubber band that is snapping, it's loud. When you get a herd of 1,000 caribou all migrating from their like fall to spring migration, you can hear this clicking sound. If you can imagine that there's almost no visibility for the animals, I've read the theories that it's also a way for the male reindeer and the females to gather.
Speaking of sounds, now, there is a traditional reindeer call, which is a very special song you sing to your reindeer. Just tell us about that.
So it's the Sami traditional way of singing called yoik, and we often yoik to make them come to us because they are half domestic reindeers, so they will actually come to you. I don't yoik so often, but especially in the springtime when we are moving with the reindeer herd from the winter pastures to the summer areas, I can see the reindeers are in a good shape, they are healthy, they are pregnant, and you get a little bit proud because we made it through this winter and everything has been great. And then I yoik because I'm proud of the reindeers and all the surroundings.
And Louise, could you sing your yoik for us, please, and just explain to us what the meaning of it is?
I cannot yoik my own yoik for you, because if I would do that in front of other Samis, they will think I am bragging about myself. Maybe they will think I'm drunk. But I can yoik my mom's yoik for you. And a yoik should describe you as you are as a person. You don't need to use words. So just give me a second. I'm like a Spotify. I have 500 yoiks in my head. I have to find the right one.
It's amazing.
Hey oh lo la 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 lo 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 lo. Is the boss.
Now, Anna Louise, you come from a family of Sami reindeer herders, and the Sami are an indigenous community that live in northern Finland. Now, Anna Louise, found in Norway, Sweden, and Russia. Just tell me about your own background, because your experience is a bit unusual within the community, because reindeer herds are traditionally passed on from father to son. But in your family, the woman took over. So how did that happen?
Well, it started with my grandmother. She was married, of course, with my grandfather, and he passed away when he was 29 years old. So my grandmother was left alone when she was 23 years old. So she took over the reindeer herd and worked really hard. And she passed away in 2000, and my mom took over. I have been born into the reindeer herding, and the reindeer was there before I came, so it has been a part of my life since I was a baby.
Now, your community has been domesticating reindeer since the 15th century, and the right to own and herd reindeer is central to Sami culture. Could you just explain to us how until recently indigenous communities in some parts of the Arctic wouldn't be able to survive without reindeer, just the importance of the reindeer to your community?
So the reindeers, they have always been here, and we actually don't know about anything else than the reindeers. And that is also the biggest reason why we live here. It's the reindeers. The reindeer Samis now, today, we are meat producers. So we sell reindeers to the local slaughtery and bring reindeer meat to the Norwegian market. Then we use every part of the reindeer skin for clothing, the antlers for decoration.
So your life then, Anne-Louise, is deeply, deeply intertwined with the life of your herd, because during the year you follow the animals as they migrate and you have to adapt your lifestyle to theirs, because that's what you've just been doing. You've been on the migrating with them, haven't you?
We have some men who say that they are the boss of the reindeers, but it's different. The reindeer decides what we can do and what we can't do. The reindeers decides when I can go to the toilet, when I can go to sleep. When I'm sick, I cannot be sick. I have to be with them. So they are actually the bosses of our life.
I've heard that there was a bit of a situation recently when you were migrating south where your herd got mixed up with another herd. What happened there?
Well, the last years our reindeer herd has been going through the fence, so they actually don't care about fences anymore. And there was another reindeer herd moving to the autumn areas next to our summer area. So they all mixed up, and we started separating them on Tuesday, and we were finished Saturday.
Well, it sounds idyllic in terms of being amongst nature, but it also sounds like very physical work. It doesn't sound easy. And you have children as well, Anna-Louise. Is it hard being a woman doing the job you do?
Of course, it has been really tough sometimes. Last winter we had the worst winter I can ever remember. It was so much snow, the reindeers couldn't get through the snow, and I had to be with the reindeer herd all the time. And in the same time, my son, he was 6 years old last year, and he had to be with my mom and go to school. I couldn't bring him because the situation was that we were looking after the reindeers every minute. You couldn't have a longer break than 10 minutes. So sometimes it's hard, but when it comes to April, May, the snow is melting, reindeer calves are born, you forget all of the bad things you have been through, and yeah, that's one of the biggest reasons why we live here. It's that time of the year.
Now, I've heard you should never ask a reindeer herder how many animals they have. Why is that, Anna-Louise?
It's quite personal, and I have been working with tourist groups, and they always ask me that question, so I'm quite used to that. It's the same question if I ask you how much money do you have in your bank account. And I understand you don't want to tell me.
Now, Jackie, you don't have your own herd, is that right?
Yes, I educate those students in the Bering Strait region and also in northern Finland about how would you provide and care for your reindeer for their herd as best as they can. For some students, there's between 1 to even 2 generations where their families haven't been herding, and these adult students have come back to school to learn about specifically health and disease of reindeer, and what are current day methods for prevention of different types of bacteria, viruses.
I'd like to know a bit more about your own background, because you're originally from Canada, but you've been adopted by a Sami village in Finland. How did that happen?
Well, you can imagine starting off university and you're not really sure what program should you do, because at 18 years of age, I wanted to be a professional women's hockey player in the NHL. I was going to be a sports physiotherapist. I was going to be a musician. And I was going to be a mad scientist.
Okay.
So I remember quite clearly I was 18, and in the month of September, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources were looking for interns or volunteers to work with their woodland caribou capture team on the Slate Islands. And I applied and I was accepted.
What was it about them that immediately drew you in?
The smell, the sight, sitting back in the boreal forest and just watching like animal behavior, watching their movements. So starting from 18, I knew I wanted to study health and disease so that the animals, especially the woodland caribou, that they wouldn't be on an endangered species list because of the health aspect. And from there, then, for school, I continued to go on. I followed the reindeer. So as reindeer migrate, so did I. And the funding source was in Uppsala, Sweden. And I was offered a 4.5-year fully funded PhD opportunity in veterinary sciences. And what was never disclosed was that for all of the 4.5 years of my PhD, that all of the research work, the field work, was in northern Finland, in the Sami reindeer homeland range.
So presumably you learnt the language, not just Finnish, but also Northern Sami. Are you fluent now?
I speak Northern Sami like perhaps a 5-year-old child.
Could you say a couple of phrases for us? And Anne-Louise can be a judge.
Yes, I could.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Mun namalea Jackie. Muslea Biana, so namalea Yeti. I said, hello, my name is Jackie. I have a dog. His name is Yeti.
That's good. That's good. I appreciate you trying.
Aipas pueri ja mun äitin vis mä oon touched. She was very great speaking Sami and I understood everything, so not a 5-year-old, maybe a 15-year-old. So
there you go.
Great.
It's a Christmas-themed conversation today with two women who live and work with reindeer. Anna-Louise Niskop is a traditional reindeer herder from the indigenous Sami community, and Jackie Hrabok-Leppäjärvi holds a joint professorship at the University of Alaska Fairbanks Northwest Campus and the Sami Education Institute in Kaminen, where she teaches reindeer husbandry and arts. And now, Jackie, you work closely with local communities in Finland and in Alaska to develop a sustainable reindeer husbandry culture. How does that work?
So what we do specifically with our students is when they come in, we fly them in from their villages, which could be like 700 kilometers away. Right now, what they are studying, it's actually English for reindeer herders. It is targeted at helping an adult student who owns reindeer or who is wishing to own reindeer in order to be able to write research grants to make it sustainable. Well, they're providing the natural food source for the regions where, especially in this time of not having the sea ice, the communities here aren't able to rely on marine mammals for food, for subsistence. Some of the herds are community-owned herds instead of a family-based herd, and those families in the Bering Strait region, meat is the number one reason why they own the herd. Some incorporate reindeer in tourism, and that means that they actually are not harvesting reindeer for meat production. Right now, they're raising them to increase the numbers because they have had so many consecutive hard winters where they've been losing the numbers of their herd. Some is due to climate change and change in the weather, and especially even right now, what we're seeing here, later fall, we have had so much precipitation as rain that has frozen, and then we received snow, and then the snow melted, so it's just a layer of ice and then more snow on top, which means that reindeer, in some areas, they're losing more energy in the hunt for food than they are actually ingesting. So it could be a very long, difficult winter. And if the herders don't have a bank supply where they're able to purchase and fly in supplemental feed, it's going to be a very difficult time for being a reindeer.
Yeah. And Anna Louise, can I bring you in here? Because is this something that you're experiencing, you're seeing too? The reindeer are struggling to find food, and how are you adapting to that?
Last couple of years, we haven't had this cold, stable winter temperatures. It should normally be here around -20, -30 degrees Celsius, but the winters are milder and it's snowing, and we have this wind. It's constantly this wind blowing the snow and packing it so hard together that the reindeers can't reach the food. So like last year we had to feed the reindeers twice a day to keep them alive. I have always learned that the reindeer is going to feed us. Now it seems that it's going the other way. We have to feed the reindeer to keep them. But we have the same connection to the reindeer, and we try to do the best we can to keep them here. And we have been through challenges before, and I think that maybe we will manage to go this climate change as well.
And Louise, as someone who spends a lot of time with reindeer, what do you think makes them so special?
I don't know. They're cute, of course. It's just how they are and how they work as a team, because they are a lot of reindeers walking together, and if you scare one, then everyone gets scared. And I also work with to train tourism reindeer, so I spend a lot of time with them as well, and I can see how they know if I'm in a hurry or if I'm really relaxed, and if I come into them and I'm stressed up, and they get also stressed up, and it's very fascinating how they can read how I am.
And do you see them as having personalities, Anne-Louise? Do you get a sense of the differences between the reindeers?
They say all of the reindeers look the same, but they have different personalities and different names. So some reindeer you can tell them to come by their name. You can very easily see on the reindeers that you are training that some of them are very shy, like a reindeer normally should be. And then you have the ones who are not afraid of people, and they will maybe jump on people and they are playing with you, or maybe gives you a kiss or something. And then you have the stubborn ones who won't do as you say. They like to challenge you, and actually those are the ones I prefer. I like them.
Oh, really? So you have preferences. Do you have a favorite reindeer?
It's a bad thing to say that you have a favorite reindeer, but of course you have. And in the reindeer herd I have a couple of favorites, and I always look after them. When the big reindeer herd is all together, my eyes are searching for them. And then I have favorite ones that I'm training as well, that maybe the favorite one gets more reindeer snacks than the other ones.
Jackie, what's been your experiences? Do you think they have personalities? Have you experienced that side of them?
Absolutely. You have those that will come closer to you, whether it's for food. It's for food.
What does a reindeer smell like up close?
It depends the time of the season. During calving in the springtime, you smell soil. You smell nature. You smell the fresh scent. It's not a strong, like, pungent smell. You only get that smell in the springtime in the corral.
Let me go over then to you, Anne-Louise. What smell do you associate with your herd?
Well, normally in the wintertime I can't actually smell them unless they are stressed up. When the reindeer herd is stressed up, they will release these hormones and it will give a smell. But once I am taming, they It's like she's saying, they smell nature. It's a special smell of them because these ones are not stressed up. They are the laziest reindeers you can find, and it's a nice smell.
What are your plans for the holiday season, Anna-Louise? How do you usually spend Christmas?
I don't know what I will be doing. I guess the reindeer will decide.
And Jackie, what will Christmas look like for you?
Christmas means, to me, I have to hurry up and hand-stitch home-tanned reindeer leather into homemade gifts for friends and family. I have been doing this for the last now almost 12 years.
Oh, wow. So what do you make, Jackie? What sort of things do you produce?
What I've learned from, I'll say, being half my life growing up in Common, I've learned to make traditional types of like leather goods, and my favorite one is, I'll call it the pucker purse. So it's a purse that would be carried by girls or women to hold, well, your modern day items of your smartphone and your keys. And I use the reindeer leather that I've been tanning myself using willow or alder bark from around the villages. And I blend it also with fish skin or fish leather. So I'm sewing mostly purses and wallets.
Sounds fantastic. We've been talking about all things reindeer related with Jackie Hrobok Lepärjärvi, who teaches reindeer husbandry and arts in Finland and Alaska, and Anna-Louise Nescope, a traditional reindeer herder from Norway. I'm going to leave you with more of Anna-Louise's singing. Till next time.
Hey oh loy la 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 lo loy la. Hey oh lo 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 loy la. Hey oh loy la la le lo loy la. Le lo 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 loy la. Hey oh loy la la le lo.
This is the BBC World Service. What can a body reveal about a person's life?
Beethoven, the composer of some of the world's most famous pieces of music. After his death in 1827, his autopsy revealed he was suffering from numerous ailments. I'm Georgia Mann, exploring how Beethoven's illnesses became a part of his music.
Dissecting Beethoven at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries. And in 60 minutes, Hard Talk with Stephen Sacker.
My guest is the tech entrepreneur and venture capitalist Herman Hauser. He was a leader of the UK's computing revolution. But as the US and China battle for global tech supremacy, is Europe in danger of losing out?
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall. Dozens of countries enforced travel bans on the United Kingdom after the emergence in the UK of a highly infectious variant of the coronavirus. But will they really control its spread?
There's also cases in Denmark, there's 2 cases in Australia, 1 in Italy, and then we're hearing reports from the Netherlands and Belgium. So I think it's not inconceivable that this variant is more widely spread.
We report on how a drugs bust in Italy revealed the scale of illegal narcotics production in Syria.
This is the biggest haul we've ever done, the biggest in the world of Captagon. Looking at the amount, we think it would have flooded an entire market.
Tensions rise in the Central African Republic ahead of elections. And behold the Christmas star, how an alignment to the planets Saturn and Jupiter is lightening up our night skies. That's after the news.
BBC News, I'm John Shea. France has indicated it may lift a 48-hour ban on lorries crossing the Channel from Britain if European Union countries can agree rules on movement from the UK. The French Transport Minister said EU members are trying to draw up a solid health protocol at a meeting that's taking place in Brussels. Gavin Lee is in the Belgian capital.
One of the main options which France are particularly pushing is that if they open their borders soon, they would like to see rapid COVID tests apply to be able to open for freight, and they would have categories of people who could move quickly. So first of all, it would be cross-border workers, including freight drivers, vulnerable and health workers, and then it comes to those sort of lower down the pecking order. So I think that is what we can expect over the Christmas period, if they can agree tomorrow morning.
The European Medicines Agency is meeting to decide whether to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine. It's expected to allow the vaccine to be rolled out across the European Union. Anna Holligan is in Amsterdam.
The pressure is on with the rising infection rates, tough lockdowns, this new variant of the virus that's brought movement between the UK and the rest of the continent to a standstill. In terms of how soon could the vaccine be rolled out, well, especially Germany has expressed a lot of frustration, impatience with the process, and they're hoping to administer the first doses by the 27th of December if the approval goes ahead.
Members of Parliament in Denmark have voted to approve a ban on mink breeding until 2022, retroactively creating the legal basis for the government's order to cull all mink. The authorities in Denmark were worried that a mutated form of coronavirus found in mink might impair the efficacy of vaccines. Millions of mink carcasses are to be dug up and burned in May, when officials say the risk of contamination will have passed. A court in Germany has sentenced a far-right extremist, Stefan Balliet, to life in jail for the murder of 2 people and for attempting to murder more than 50 others in a thwarted attack on a synagogue last year. From Berlin, here's Damien McGuinness.
The 28-year-old German right-wing extremist will most likely never leave jail. Stefan Balliet was sentenced to life in prison for murder and attempted murder after he tried to storm a packed synagogue and then shot 2 people dead when he went on the run. Judges said he was seriously culpable, effectively barring him from early release. He confessed the attack, but showed no remorse, apologising only for shooting a woman passing by, saying he didn't want to kill whites.
A court in London has found 2 men guilty of the manslaughter of 39 Vietnamese migrants. They suffocated as they were smuggled into Britain in a refrigerated lorry trailer in October last year. This is the latest world news from the BBC. The investigative group Bellingcat has revealed that the Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny has had a long conversation by phone with a security service agent sent to clear up the poisoning operation in Siberia, which left him fighting for his life. Bellingcat says Mr. Navalny impersonated a senior FSB official. The operative revealed the Novichok toxin had been placed in a pair of underpants. There's been no comment from the Russian authorities. The European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief, Josep Borrell, has urged the authorities in Bosnia to open alternative facilities to house more than 3,000 migrants who face eviction from a reception centre in the northwest of the country. Here's Guy Delorney.
The Lipa reception centre near the northwestern city of Bihać was due to close over the weekend, but last-minute negotiations have earned its residents a reprieve. The International Organisation for Migration says the authorities' failure to provide water and electricity makes the centre unsuitable for winter accommodation, and it's still a real possibility that people will be sent to fend for themselves in the Bosnian winter with nothing more than a sleeping bag. But IOM officials now hope that the EU's intervention will encourage local authorities to reach a deal to rehab
Still to come, many Australians have been stranded abroad by the COVID pandemic, with their home country only letting limited numbers of them back into the country. Competition for seats on flights is high, and many are running out of money.
They are only taking the highest paying passengers. Australians are just being bumped off those flights. We fully expect that we will be out of pocket in excess of $50,000.
And the latest headlines from the BBC Newsroom. France has raised hopes that freight lorries will be able to cross from Britain once the EU has agreed a common response to the spread of a new variant of coronavirus circulating in southern England. Dozens of other countries are enforcing travel bans on the UK. And the European Medical Agency is meeting to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine. You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall, and this is NewsHour. Kyle Rittenhouse has been charged with the murder of 2 Black Lives Matter protesters in August during a march in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the United States. Though he claims he acted in self-defense and his case is yet to go to trial, the 17-year-old has been lionized online by the far right in the United States, with, according to experts, YouTube contributing to the spread of that support. James Clayton has been investigating. Some listeners may find parts of his report disturbing.
All right, we're going to run what I'm going to call a Kyle drill.
There are lots of gun videos on YouTube. This one, though, is a little different.
This now becomes our simulated mob. All right, so this is your target area.
A man wearing sunglasses and carrying an assault rifle is taking us through an obstacle course at a gun range.
This is 4 shots. I know that's how many Kyle took.
He's trying to recreate the moment Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed 2 protesters in Kenosha earlier this year.
So we're going to assume you got to get 1 shot, 1 kill on Skater 2.
Extremist groups love the internet. It's enabled far-right groups like the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys to recruit, radicalise and grow.
Actually, we had a show last night. We swore Michael Graves in from the Misfits. He actually became a Proud Boy.
That's made journalists like me particularly interested in how big tech tackles this problem. And when it comes to extremism, there's one platform that experts believe is particularly bad: YouTube. Here's Chloe Colliver from the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, a think tank that studies extremism.
YouTube has largely flown under the radar in terms of its policies towards extremist content and disinformation, but it's also fallen behind other tech companies in its policies and its enforcement around these kind of issues. The Rittenhouse example is just one clue as to the lack of proactive action taken against extremist material on the platform.
Facebook has a clear policy when it comes to Rittenhouse, such as banning his name from being searched. But YouTube doesn't. It does have pre-existing rules about removing videos that glorify violence or ones containing adult content, but are they actually being enforced? I decided to look at some of the content being created and uploaded about Kyle Rittenhouse on the platform, and then asked the company what they thought about it.
We're gonna assume a sitting position in an expedited manner, right? Kyle obviously kind of tripped a little bit, fell.
First up, that footage we played earlier. YouTube removed it, saying it flouted its rules after I showed it to them. A pretty clear-cut case. Well, maybe not, because listen to this.
In today's video, we're going to be showing you how to prepare for a pandemic situation like the one Kyle Rittenhouse was in. If you ever fall down like a dummy and you need to engage targets while off your back. All 3 of us.
It's very similar to the first clip, a training video recreating a mass shooting with targets. Yet YouTube decided this was okay and left it up, although it did put an age limit on it. There are dozens of other videos we found that clearly glorify Rittenhouse. Take this one. Someone has created a platform computer game video with Rittenhouse as an action figure shooting protesters. The video was taken down when we showed it to YouTube. But what about this song?
Save for one young man among them with an AR in his hand. AR in his hand.
It pretty obviously glorifies Kyle Rittenhouse. Again, YouTube took it down when I showed it to them. Here's the thing though, there are plenty of posts on its platform that use this exact song that still haven't been taken down. What you may be noticing by now is how arbitrary and inconsistent a lot of this moderation appears to be. With the absence of defined rules around Rittenhouse, users will inevitably push the envelope. This is Angelo Carasoni from Media Matters, which monitors extremism online.
While some pro-Rittenhouse content still gets through on Facebook, the reason why YouTube is actually like a safe
30,000 people stranded overseas for months on end. Henry Bellot has been speaking to some of them.
What was meant to be a short holiday overseas has become a nightmare for Melbourne resident Jess. 10 months after leaving, she's now stuck in the UK, struggling financially and separated from loved ones over Christmas.
Oh, it's going to be heartbreaking. Yeah, it's going to be really hard.
The mother, who can't be identified for professional reasons, has no right to work in the UK, so accommodation and living costs have depleted her savings.
We're just down to the credit cards now, so we've just sold a car today to try and pay for things.
Anyone returning to Australia must pay thousands of dollars to quarantine in a hotel room for 2 weeks. But the government has capped the number of citizens who can return, and some airlines are only accepting 30 people on each flight.
They are only taking the highest paying passengers.
That's David Jeffries, who flew to Canada to care for his mother, who has late-stage cancer. His wife and son have had 7 flight cancellations in 9 months.
Australians are just being bumped off those flights. We fully expect that we will be out of pocket in excess of $50,000.
Meanwhile, Jess has had 6 flight cancellations, and with no job, she can no longer afford tickets for her son and partner. So she's planning to return alone next month so she can begin working and save for their flights. In September, Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison said he hoped all stranded citizens like Jess and David would be brought home by Christmas. But balancing the right to return with keeping COVID cases low has been difficult. As the pandemic has worsened overseas, the number of people wanting to come home has increased.
We know you want to come home and you have every right to come home. You're an Australian and you're my first priority in terms of people coming back into the country.
Mr Morrison told Channel 7 News that the majority of people stranded are in India or the UK.
We're looking to get you home as soon as we possibly can.
Many of those stranded are angry at the government for slowing their return home, but others, like Jess, are upset at a lack of sympathy from fellow Australians.
The amount of hatred that we're getting online is just something that's been really disheartening.
She's read comments wishing people would catch COVID-19 and die because they didn't want them to return to Australia. Others blame them for leaving in the first place.
I think Australia forgets that it's a multicultural country. It is made up of people who have family all over the world, and to say that they don't deserve to return back because they've got roots in other countries, I think is just disgusting.
Just sending that report by Henry Bellot on the Australians stranded aboard for months on end because of the country's quarantine requirements and strict border controls. You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall and you're listening to NewsHour, coming to you live from our studios in central London. Viruses mutate. It's normal for viruses to mutate. So how alarmed should we be about the emergence of this highly infectious variant of the coronavirus, which is now prevalent in southern England? And if the variant is that much easier to transmit, how do you stop its spread, both within the UK and around the rest of the world? On Sunday, as its impact was starting to be felt, Britain's Health Secretary Matt Hancock said people had to act as if they all had the variant.
The new variant is out of control and we need to bring it under control. And this news about the new variant has been an incredibly difficult end to, frankly, an awful year. And it's important for everybody to act, essentially act like they might have the virus. And that's the way that we can control it together. It's not something for government or individuals. It's something for us all to do together.
But could this new variant of the coronavirus also be resistant to the vaccines that have been developed to counter the existing strain? I've been speaking to Dr. Lucy Van Dorp, Senior Research Fellow in Microbial Genomics at the UCL Genetics Institute. What's known for certain about this virus mutation?
At the moment, what we know is we have a variant in circulation which is carrying 14 defining mutations, which we haven't seen in the combination we see in this particular variant before. This includes 7 within the spike protein of the coronavirus, which is the protein that's most important for binding and entering human cells. One of the reasons that this has raised some concern is because some of these previously identified mutations have been implicated in having some kind of biological relevance. So the vast majority of mutations we have in this virus, and mutations are very much a natural process, and there's thousands of variants in circulation, have no impact. But in this case, we do have sets of mutations which have been flagged as maybe relevant, so are important in terms of the ability of the virus to bind to human cells, and also potentially for some degree of immune evasion. And so this is one of the reasons, together with the very marked increase in frequency of this particular variant within the UK, that scientists are studying it really very carefully right as we speak.
But what makes this variant so infectious, up to 70% more infectious?
Yeah, so the number's 70%, and I should say the actual way this was calculated is still not completely in the scientific domain, but this 70% value is based on the growth rate of this variant compared to others we have in circulation. There's a couple of reasons why we might see this increase in growth rate, and not all of those relate to the transmission of the virus, but one plausible explanation, and one that certainly we're all following up on right now, is that the virus is intrinsically more transmissible, and things are starting to point in that direction. But actually right now we're still trying to grapple with whether the transmissibility is an inherent property of this particular variant or not.
You used the word immunovasive earlier on. What does that mean?
Yes. So this is really referring to the ability of our immune response, this is antibodies, to detect or really recognise this particular variant as opposed to some of the other variants we have in circulation. And antibody recognition is really due to many different things. This is quite a large virus, about 30,000 or so positions in length, and there's plenty for antibodies to react to. But some of the most immunodominant, so the regions which elicit most of the immune response, are in the coronavirus spike protein. And in this case, we do have 7 mutations in the spike protein. This is unlikely to completely invalidate our immune response, of course, but we need to be aware of any mutations in this region because it might have some kind of partial effect. And that's something that really can only be confirmed in the lab. And right now, we don't know for this particular variant.
I mean, as soon as you start to talk about viruses and immune response, I think vaccines, and, you know, the vaccines that have been developed have been based on the existing coronavirus. Should we be concerned that this variant is perhaps vaccine resistant?
Yeah, so I think the honest answer is we don't know. But as I mentioned, we really expect the response elicited by vaccines to be across the entire spike protein. And this is a protein that's maybe was around 1,200 positions or so in length, so having maybe 7 changes and 3 deletions, which is what we have in this case. It would be a surprise if this had a very significant impact on vaccine efficacy. But of course, this is something that's being followed up on. And I think one lesson we're learning from this variant is it shows that there is some ability of this particular virus to evolve and adapt to in response to our own immune system. And it's not completely inconceivable that at some point in the longer term, we might need to think about designing vaccines or updating vaccines to reflect the variants that are currently in circulation. And this is something that's actually quite doable with the current mRNA vaccine technologies. So we shouldn't be frightened by that as a possibility.
As early ago as September, I understand, and at the moment we have countries all around the world banning travel and goods coming in from the UK. But it occurs to me it's conceivable that this variant has already seeded within those other countries.
Yeah, and just on your first point, the very first cases we see when we look back in our sequencing repositories for this variant do date to September, but really the variant itself was only identified far more recently as being potentially important. Like I said, we have very many variants in circulation, and you sort of need a few more warning signs before you zoom in and focus on any particular one. With regards to kind of the global distribution, so right now, in terms of genomes that have been shared, most of those are in the UK, but there's also cases in Denmark, there's 2 cases in Australia, 1 in Italy, and then we're hearing reports from the Netherlands and Belgium. So I think it's not inconceivable that this variant is more widely spread. And certainly here in the UK, we're doing a lot of the genome genome sequencing, or a lot of the genome sequencing is being done here by a consortium called COG UK. And so actually we have a very good picture of what's circulating in the UK, and we're really all waiting now with bated breath to see, as more genomes are generated and shared from other countries across Europe, to get a better idea as to where this variant is distributed. And this will be incredibly important in terms of the justification for things like travel bans, and also about how we manage and mitigate transmission going forward.
That was Dr. Lucy van Dorp from the UCL Genetics Institute in London. An unprecedented drug seizure in Italy this year, more than $1 billion worth of the amphetamine Captagon, has revealed the scale of illegal drug production in Syria. It's the largest haul ever seized, some 14 tons, and was followed by smaller drugs busts across the Middle East in what appears to be a coordinated effort against the lucrative narcotics trade likely run by the Syrian regime and its allies. The drug is used recreationally across the Middle East, but is also taken by fighters, who say it gives them a feeling of invincibility on the front lines. From Naples, our correspondent Quentin Somerville gained exclusive access to the drug's journey.
Italy's financial crimes police are on a nighttime mission that has been months in the making. Earlier this summer, they seized €1 billion of amphetamines. Initially, they thought they came from the Islamic State group. Well, they weren't right about that, but tonight they're taking those drugs to be incinerated.
High above Naples, 2 helicopters follow an 11-vehicle convoy, including 2 heavily laden trucks. They're taking advantage of the COVID curfew and set off through empty streets. It's a 9-hour journey to the other side of the country.
Andiamo sul porto, giusto? Okay. The convoy below is heavily armed because inside the trucks are 85 million amphetamine pills. It was the biggest drugs bust of its kind. The source of origin wasn't the Islamic State group, but this drugs bust and a wave of others which have occurred across the world, well, the source turned out to be Syria.
The drugs came from the Syrian port of Latakia, the second haul the Italians have seized this summer. The Syrian regime and its ally, Lebanese militia Hezbollah, are deep in the drugs trade. It's a major source of funding. 3 tons of hashish are also on the trucks and will go up in flames today. Lieutenant Daniele Caroletti is the chopper pilot.
What about the cargo that's down there? Why is it so special?
It's special because this is subtract to illegal organization, a world illegal organization. Little by little, we try to win a war. This night, maybe we won a battle, but it's an important one.
This drug Captagon, I've seen it all over the Middle East, in battlefields in Iraq, in Syria, Libya. It's used by militia. The Islamic State group take it, but I've just never seen it in these quantities. 14 tons of this stuff in these giant containers. And actually, as we sit here, you can kind of smell the chemical nature of these amphetamines. In Libya, I met young fighters wasted on Captagon. For them, it helped banish fear and the need for sleep. It brought the illusion of invincibility and helped ease the terrors of the front line. The man in charge of destroying the drugs in Italy is Colonel Danilo Toma.
This is the biggest haul we've ever done, the biggest in the world of Captagon. Looking at the amount, we think it would have flooded an entire market.
It's been a bad year for Syria's drugs operation. An Egyptian government video parades the capture of millions of dollars worth of Captagon hidden in thousands of water filters. It's one of 3 huge seizures of Syrian-produced Captagon which took place in November alone. That sound you can hear is 14 tonnes of amphetamine heading towards the incinerator. It's being tossed into a giant rubbish dump where a huge metal claw is mixing it with all sorts of other waste. There's so much of the drug, they say that it's going to take them until nightfall to burn through it. But Italian officials tell us that these drugs weren't headed for the streets of Europe. They were bound for another destination, for Libya. The industrial scale of production and the waves of shipments indicate that the heavily sanctioned Damascus regime makes millions from the drugs trade. The run of drug seizures this year is a big financial hit on the allies of Bashar al-Assad, and the West is counting this as another win over the narcos of the Middle East.
Quentin Somerville reporting there on the illegal production in Syria of the amphetamine Captagon, which finds its way from Syria to Libya. You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall, and this is NewsHour.
Now we're going to take a look at what follows NewsHour today. In just 10 minutes, the guest on Hard Talk is the venture capitalist and entrepreneur Herman Hauser.
So 50 billion ought to be spent to get our independence from Chinese monopolies, and the other 50 billion we ought to spend to get out from under American monopolies.
And at bbcworldservice.com, listen to our series looking at climate change.
For 195 governments to come to that conclusion and to that agreement with each other, it requires extraordinary mindset shifts.
And find out on crowd science why some of us are clumsy.
It's really a whole brain process, but there's also a lot of places where little hiccups could happen and behavior could be negatively impacted as a result.
You can hear more at bbcworldservice.com. Now it's back to NewsHour with Julian Marshall.
And a reminder of our top story this hour. France has raised hopes that freight lorries will be able to cross from Britain once the EU has agreed a common response to the spread of a new variant of coronavirus circulating in southern England. Dozens of other countries are enforcing travel bans on the UK. Food security expert Dr. Peter Alexander says an extended border closure could mean shortage of some produce in the UK.
Obviously, within the UK, we do rely quite heavily on food imports. We only produce roughly 55% of the foods that we consume within the UK, so we have to import that sort of remaining 45%, and that primarily comes from the EU.
Also this hour, the European Medical Agency has approved the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine for use throughout the European Union. You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall, and this is NewsHour. The Central African Republic, which is rich in diamonds, gold, oil and uranium, is scheduled to hold elections next weekend. But in a country where power has rarely been decided through the ballot box, the poll was always going to be problematic. The country is awash with armed rebel groups. The current president, Faustin Archange Touadéra, relies on UN, Rwandan and Russian troops for his security. And he's accused of former President François Bozizé, who's been barred from standing in the election, of leading an attempted coup. And as tensions rise, yet more Rwandan and Russian troops have been deployed in the country. So what's behind this latest increase in violence? Paul Jackson is Professor of African Politics at the University of Birmingham here in England.
The current flare-up is really caused by the fact that there is an election coming up on December 27th, and you have the incumbent president, Touadéra, and his coalition of different militia groups up against the former president, Bouzize, who has actually been banned from standing by the court. But he came back in July and declared that he was going to stand. So the Central African Republic is basically a series of shifting sands of different militias. And so you have different coalitions on each side. And last week, what happened was that 3 of the biggest ones came together to support Bouzize, and they marched on the capital, which has sort of precipitated this very latest round of violence.
And the external players, Rwanda, Russia, France, the former colonial power?
You have the UN that intervened after the fall of Bouzize in 2013, and then the French that had a military intervention in 2016 and guaranteed the election of the current president. But then underneath that UN mandate, you have the Russians who unusually in Africa have been mandated by the UN to retrain and re-equip the army of the Central African Republic. The other external players, you have to look at the Rwandans, who make up quite a large contingent within the UN force. And actually, they have sent troops in over the last couple of days because their troops are the ones that are being attacked by Bouzize's rebels that were advancing on the capital city.
You've referred a number of times to armed militias. I mean, how did they spring up? And are they based on ethnicity? Are they based on religion?
They're based on a mixed set of principles, really. At the simplest level, they are Muslim militia against Christian militia. And all of these groups are permeable to some degree. And anyone who's in power essentially relies on trying to knit together and maintain coalitions of these separate groups.
So what are the prospects of next weekend's elections going ahead, and for whoever wins those elections being accepted by all these dissident armed militias?
I think because the international community is very keen for the elections to go ahead, I think they will. My personal view is that Todera will win. I would say that the election isn't really going to change that much. So you'll have the capital, Bangui, still being controlled by the UN and the Russians to a lesser extent, and maybe the French, who remain the biggest military force in the country. But then whoever wins, the opposition groups of militias are not going to accept them in a hurry.
Do the CAR's mineral deposits play a part in all these shifting alliances and grabs for power?
Yes, as always, it has very generous deposits of diamonds and gold and uranium. And because although the Russians are in there completely legally and under the auspices of the UN, although no one actually knows this for certain, there are serious suspicions that effectively that is a guns and training for mineral resources deal.
That was Paul Jackson, Professor of African Politics at the University of Birmingham in England. Two men have been found guilty in the UK of the manslaughter of the 39 Vietnamese migrants who were found dead in a lorry trailer in southern England in October last year. They suffocated inside the sealed container on the way back to Britain from the Belgian port of Zeebrugge. Eamon Harrison, who dropped off the trailer at the port, and Georges Nicart were convicted at the Old Bailey in London. I'm joined now by our correspondent Daniel Samford. And this was a shocking incident, was it not, at the time, Daniel?
It was an extraordinarily shocking incident. In the early hours of the 23rd of October last year, the police received an emergency phone call from a young lorry driver from Northern Ireland saying that he had dozens of people not breathing in the back of his lorry trailer. And when they arrived, they discovered that there were 39 dead Vietnamese migrants in a single lorry trailer. They'd all suffocated in the airtight trailer partway across the North Sea between Zeebrugge in Belgium and Purfleet on the Thames estuary just to the east of London. Here we are now a year and 2 months on, and we've got to the end of the legal process. And by the end of this process, 4 men have now been found guilty in total of manslaughter, and 4 other people guilty of a wider conspiracy to assist illegal immigration. Essentially, this gang made up of people from Northern Ireland, lorry drivers from Northern Ireland, and also British Romanians from the Essex area largely, were essentially selling a VIP service across the North Sea, a way supposedly of guaranteed entry to the UK. People would start their journey in taxis, but would then get moved into a lorry trailer. There'd been 2 successful runs in the 2 weeks before the deaths, but on the day of the deaths, the gang had doubled up the number of people in the trailer, and there simply wasn't enough oxygen for them, and they died halfway across the sea.
And comments made in court, Daniel, quite a few about how appalling this all was.
Yes, I mean, the police and the National Crime Agency, which handles people smuggling into the UK, are obviously trying to get the message across to people around the world that when you're being sold a VIP service for being smuggled into Britain, that VIP service is as likely to be a death trap. One of the police officers, that DCI Daniel Stoughton, who was leading this investigation, was saying that the people on this so-called VIP service were actually being treated worse than animals are treated when they're moved across the Channel or across the North Sea between Britain and Europe. And there's obviously a great desire that people understand that even when they're paying, in this case, 10,000 UK pounds for a single person to cross the Channel, the risks are still there and people can die.
Daniel, many thanks. That was the BBC's Daniel Sanford, and that's it from this edition of NewsHour. From me, Julian Marshall, and the rest of the team in London, goodbye.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
Rachel Barry is one of the world's most respected master whisky blenders. Follow Rachel in her whisky lab and in the distillery in Scotland as she puts the finishing touches to her latest selection of whiskies before they're released to the public.
In the studio, Tuesday at 13:30 and 23:30 GMT. And in an hour, we join Nuala McGovern for OS.
The very infectious variant of the COVID-19 virus in the UK has ground plans to a halt for millions of people. We're going to hear from 2 women now stuck in the UK as governments introduce new restrictions to stop the flow of people to try and stop the spread.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Coming up after the news on the BBC World Service, it's
Because your experience is a bit unusual within the community because reindeer herds are traditionally passed on from father to son. But in your family, the woman took over. So how did that happen?
Well, it started with my grandmother. She was married, of course, with my grandfather. And he passed away when he was 29 years old. So my grandmother was left alone when she was 23 years old. So she took over the reindeer herd and worked really hard. And she passed away in 2000 and my mom took over. I have been born into the reindeer herding and the reindeer was there before I came, so it has been a part of my life since I was a baby.
Now, your community has been domesticating reindeer since the 15th century, and the right to own and herd reindeer is central to Sami culture. Could you just explain to us how until recently indigenous communities in some parts of the Arctic wouldn't be able to survive without reindeer, just the importance of the reindeer to your community?
So the reindeers, they have always been here and we actually don't know about anything else than the reindeers. And that is also the biggest reason why we live here. It's the reindeers. The reindeer Samis now, today, we
both
are
with China and the US,
so,
but
we
as the
sell
third
reindeers to
economic
local
superpower.